right, well, it is 2 o'clock, so we are going to get started in the interest of everyone's time. If you are joining us live, thank you so much. My name is Nate Burt. I'm the founder of Silver Maple Strategies. If you're watching this as a replay or on the podcast, delighted to have you here as well. It is May 1st, if you can believe it, here in 2025. And today's session is titled Invisible No More, How to Build a Nonprofit Brand That Funders and Partners Remember. And so my hope for you is that this can be something that is meaningful from not just a communications and visibility standpoint, but really thinking about your financial goals as a nonprofit, making sure that you're able to have the impact that you desire. That really begins with you as an individual leader and how you show up in the world and your nonprofit shows up. I decided to include a photo of a dinosaur excavation here for a very specific reason, and I'll share that in just a moment. But while I do that, if you have not yet dropped into the chat your name, your nonprofit, and where you're located in the world, please do that. Just want to make sure this is an interactive session, get to know each other a little bit, and really look forward to seeing who else here today. And also want to make sure that if you would like, anyone who is here live today is going to get dropped into the drawing here for the free branding session that we'll do in the back half of this webinar. So definitely want to make sure that I include you as well. Okay, so why did I include a dinosaur here? Well, a couple of years ago, my family and I took a trip from the St. Louis, Missouri area where we live out to see my brother and his wife on the Pacific Coast in Oregon. And along the way, we had the privilege of stopping in Wyoming, and we absolutely loved one particular activity, which was going up into the mountains and actually digging for, in this case, it wasn't dinosaur bones per se, but it was fossilized fish. Many, many years ago, this area had been a seabed. And so getting to dig through the sandstone, having all our 4 kids there, looking for fossils, it could be very exhausting and frustrating. But man, when you found that fish or those bones, you could see that there had been life here. There was a story behind this. And in a similar way, as a nonprofit, you had an opportunity to take a brush and a chisel and a hammer and really carve away at all of the external material, which again, there's nothing needless about your organization, but in order for a funder, for example, or a partner, or the clients that you serve to really understand exactly the outcomes you deliver, exactly the values that you hold, it's really important to know how to very meticulously, concisely carve out so that what's left is immediately apparent and quickly resonates with those core audiences that you're trying to serve. And so that's really the theme behind today's session. I'm going to give you 5 keys as we go through as to how to do that excavation process, or at least how to get started. But again, that's where that came from, and I hope that's helpful as setup for today's session. So let's dive in here, and let me just give you a preview. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I come from a family of fast talkers. So I've tried to break myself of the habit, haven't figured it out quite yet to the degree that I would like to. So if you need me to slow down, drop a note in the chat and say, hey, Nate, take a deep breath. I can't understand where you're going with this, and I won't be offended. I promise. You'll actually be doing me a favor. So I'm going to give you a sense of the resources I'm going to be providing you at the conclusion of today's session. Either end of this week or early next week, you'll find those landing in your inbox. Give you some quick housekeeping items to keep in mind for today. I'll tell you a little bit about me and Silver Maple Strategies, the marketing agency and consultancy that I run working with nonprofits today. Then I'll give you a sense of some of the challenges that I'm seeing on the landscape for nonprofits when it comes to really branding and showing up in your best light, connecting your stories to the kinds of funding that allow you to have the impact that you desire. I'll walk you through a little bit of the resilience leadership model, which is how we work with clients here to really get clarity, to get flexibility, to get morale built into the fabric of your organization. And that really helps you fire on all cylinders. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll give you a sense of the 5 keys that I recommend investing in. And those keys are actually going to inform the back half of our session today when I pick one of you lucky attendees to be part of this branding session. So what I'll do is I'll pull up a little name selector online. I'll make sure all of the names on this call who are here with us live are dropped in there. and then we'll click a button, and whoever the picker selects, we'll pull up their website. I'll do a little bit of Q&A with you first, just to give me and the audience a sense of what you do, what your nonprofit is focused on right now. And then we'll spend some time going through some select pages on your website and really see what's working really well for you right now, and also maybe areas that you could strengthen. And again, this is not about picking on anyone or making anyone feel bad. It's really just an opportunity to say, hey, 2025 has been a really strange year. I don't know about you all, but for a lot of my clients, it's been rather challenging. And so I think, look, there are silver linings here, right? This is a real opportunity. Even if things feel hard right now, and legitimately they might be really hard, there are opportunities to invest, right? Invest in how you show up in the world. Invest in how you frame yourself and think strategically, maybe think differently. That can really help you unlock some opportunities now and in the future. Then I'll give you some homework. We'll do a little Q&A. I have a quick survey at the end, and we'll make sure you get those resources that I promised. Love seeing all the activity in the chat. Thank you all for dropping in your names and organizations. I see Chuck, I see Ellen, Patrick, Haley, and Pam, among others. Thank you all so much for being here, and really great to have such a diverse representation of organizations, geographies, etc. At the conclusion of the call, again, late this week, early next week, I'm going to send you a copy of these slides. I will get you a copy of the recording, and I'll make sure you have what I call the invisible to visible messaging or branding clarity checklist. And again, this is going to synthesize a lot of the ideas I'm going to share today, just in a handy resource that you can check and say, hey, as you go back and talk to your organization, if you have a team, or if it's just you running the shop by yourself, that's okay, because I'm going to try to give you some pointers that you can think about in the months ahead. So first things first, just a few housekeeping items. Definitely focus your attention on the materials, the ideas, sharing comments and questions in the chat. I really want you to feel the permission to be as engaged as possible here. I know that's not always possible, but to the degree that it is, silence those cell phones and desktop alerts. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. I'm aiming to have a few minutes of dedicated Q&A at the end, but I'll also check the chat periodically. And so if something doesn't make sense or you have an experience to share, please drop that in the chat. Definitely want to add value to you and to the others who are in the room today. And then suspend disbelief, right? One of the hardest things about being in your position is the idea of like, hey, Nate, all of your ideas sound great. I don't have the time or bandwidth to even think about this, much less do something with it. So just imagine if you were to consider or explore at least one of the ideas I'm going to share with you today. What could that mean for your clarity or your confidence as a leader? What could it mean to your team? What could it mean to your clients in terms of the impact you're able to provide, in terms of your budget, your ability to sleep at night, right? So if even one of those areas could use improvement and one of the ideas you find might be worth exploring, definitely give that some serious thought. And then I love the Dan Sullivan framework of gap versus gain, right? When you're in the gap, you're thinking about comparing yourself to other nonprofits or other leaders or other people in different walks of life, and all of the ways in which you may be failing or falling short of your own personal expectations. But being in the game means that you're not comparing yourself to anyone but where you've been in the past, right? So you've grown undoubtedly as a nonprofit from where you started. I think some of you may be relatively new on this call as an organization. And so the fact that you're even in the world now, whereas in the past you weren't, that's huge, right? Take credit for that. Be proud of that. And then think about what are the next steps I could be taking to accelerate my own progress in my career as a nonprofit leader? How can we accelerate our own organization's impact and how we show up in the world, right? You are truly in a league of your own. And so I encourage you to own that and really think about what success looks like for you in the context of what we'll be talking about today. So who am I and why should you listen to me? Again, this is totally up to you, but I come from a journalism and communications background. So I started my career in newspapers and digital media, spent about a decade at Farm Journal, which is a US-based media data business solutions company, one of the largest in the United States serving agriculture, had an absolute blast, and then transitioned into my own marketing agency consultancy in October of 2022. So I've been doing this going on 3 years, working really closely with nonprofits in particular. And in our organization, we really focus on long-term strategic partnerships. So in a retainer kind of model, really looking at adding value over time and helping organizations develop resilience across their finances, operations, and strategic communications. I have a book, Seven Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators, which is sort of the playbook for leaders like you who are doing purpose-driven work, and a podcast called Secrets of Social Impact Communicators, along with a newsletter. You can get all that on my website. I won't go into a lot of more details there. I am a proud husband and dad of 4 and an aspiring farmer. My family and I live in about 8 acres. We have cattle, we have turkeys, chickens, garden, greenhouse. My wife is really the farmer in chief, and I am the labor and occasional strategy partner. So we have fun and we certainly stay busy, but we particularly love to support causes like adoption. One of our children is adopted. We have a big passion for food and fighting hunger and supporting the work of farmers. So those are our personal causes and why I'm so passionate about working with nonprofits like you. And I'm sure you all have your own personal values and reasons why the work you do matters. And so if I can help you reconnect to that purpose and get on fire and excited again, as if you weren't already, right? Sometimes the cares of life, sometimes the challenges that we face really bring us down. So I hope I can bring some of that energy to you today. These are just a few of the organizations we've helped at Silver Maple Strategies. It's not an exhaustive list, but again, pretty good geographic diversity. Again, many in the food, ag, and conservation space. Again, those are my sort of core areas of expertise, and just love working with individuals that are really trying to do good by farmers, by people who eat, which is all of us, and by the planet. So my goal this year is to help 50 nonprofit executives, and you can see the kinds of transformations we're going for. Yes, they are tactical in the sense that we're working on communications or operations or finances. But beyond that, the biggest transformation for me is the impact these leaders are able to deliver and their own personal sense of confidence, capacity, and creativity, right? Because that enables more funding. It creates greater impact for you and your team. So again, that's where we are headed, and really excited to be moving in that direction this year. Let me spend a few minutes talking about some of the key branding challenges I'm seeing nonprofits facing this year in particular. And number one, I suspect, is probably top of mind for many, if not all of you, right? A lot of organizations right now are in caution mode. And let me be clear, let me validate, that is understandable, right? In particular, again, I'm not making political statements here. I'm just making an observation as a journalist, someone who studies this space. The amount of flux and change that's happening, especially on a federal landscape, has had a big impact on a lot of organizations this year that depend on federal funding for the work they do within their nonprofit. And my guess is that that probably hasn't stopped yet, right? We're probably going to see continuing ripple effects of that, whether it's funds that were promised or committed being cut or frozen or reduced. That creates a lot of uncertainty, right? We see that out in the private sector as well, with companies uncertain about the economic environment. Are we entering a recession? And so this can really lead organizations of all kinds, but I think especially nonprofits that really do depend on strong funding relationships. When those get shaken, it can be really disarming. And so there's this tendency to sort of pull back and say, we're going to sort of either maintain a low profile, we're going to start maybe sanitizing or scrubbing some of the language that we use to talk about what we do, or some combination of that. And again, there may be cases where in order to keep the lights on, to have the impact you desire to put food on the table, you have to do that, right? And obviously you still need to be a good steward of whatever funding remains. In other cases, though, there may be a case to sort of step back and say, okay, what are we comfortable saying? What are the guardrails? We'll get into that when we talk about some keys to stronger branding in a few minutes. The second challenge that I see a lot of organizations facing is what I call past as prologue, right? So there's this idea that, okay, we've had this website or we've had this way we talk about what we do in our marketing materials, when we go to conferences, when we sit down and talk with the funder. And so if it's not broken, like money's still coming in the door, or whatever projects we're doing, they're still ongoing. We haven't had a lot of questions or concerns about the way we talk. Our board hasn't really expressed any issue with how we talk about ourselves. And so therefore, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there's a sense of we're comfortable where we're at, and why rock the boat, right? And that makes sense. Number three, there's this idea of label and box syndrome. So Jeff Woods, as an author that I came across recently as part of a business peer group, Jeff wrote a book called The AI-Driven Leader. So in our organization here at Silver Maple Strategies, we're working with a lot of nonprofits who are exploring and integrating artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, like Gemini, into their operations, doing so in a way that honors their ethical principles, their values, recognizes the trade-offs, environmental and otherwise, using AI tools. But Jeff talks about this idea that when you are inside of the box, which means inside of your own organization, it's often hard to stand outside of that and be a dispassionate observer. Like, how does the world see you, right? You have a sense of how your brand shows up in the world, how others probably think about your nonprofit, but you don't truly know that or have that independence that an outside observer would, whether that outside observer is a machine tool that you're asking to give you some critical feedback, or I recommend partnering that with human experts, right? People who are outside observers who can give you candid, helpful feedback. And so too often nonprofits are so busy, right? They have limited staff, limited financial resources that you just get in the zone of doing the work. And so there's not a lot of time or capacity to step out and say, is this the best way to be talking about what we do in order to optimize the funding opportunities we have, in order to optimize how we talk about the impact that we're delivering? Number 4, invisible outcomes. So what I mean by that is that it is very tempting as an organization, as a nonprofit that maybe does live events, educational trainings, resources, hands-on work with clients. Those things are very tangible, right? You can hold them, you can see them, you can publish them on your website. But what I see it too often is that organizations tend to talk about activities and deliverables at the expense of talking about the outcome that those things packaged together delivered. And so what I'm going to encourage you today, and I'll give you more ideas about this in a moment, is really start putting those outcomes front and center. Yes, the activities you do matter. The inputs that you're investing, whether that's research or expertise or facilitation, those things are your superpowers. And they're ultimately moving toward a transformation of some kind for the clients that you serve. So focus on the transformation is going to be a really key for you if this is something you struggle with. Number 5 is off-balance insights to audience ratio. So within your nonprofit, my guess, and we'll get into this when we do our live branding session, is that there are probably several key audiences that you speak to, right? One of them might be funders. Another might be partners that you work with to actually implement the work that you do to serve clients. Another might be, depending on how your nonprofit is structured, some have membership programs, some have policy angles or affiliates that are able to do education and outreach with policymakers at the state and federal level. In other cases, there may be other stakeholders that I haven't included. But the point is that too often, there is sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to branding and to messaging for nonprofits, especially on their online presence, like their website, which is where we're going to spend a lot of time today. And so funders and others may say, okay, so what? They don't see clearly and quickly how this speaks to them personally in the role that they have, right? And so you really want, for those who are holding a checkbook or those who are questioning whether to engage with your nonprofit or not, you want to leave no question in their mind as to what it is that you do, but also how they can engage with you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So the framework that I use when I'm working with our clients here at Silver Maple Strategies to sort of say, okay, these are the challenges we face as an industry, right? In the nonprofit space, these are some key areas where the packaged goods, right? The brand that you show up with in the world is challenged. How do you start to pick apart where to focus first? Because again, you could do a dozen different things and put 25% energy into them, or you could do one thing and put 100% of your energy behind it and really make some progress that's going to benefit you and your clients in the long term. And so when we talk about resilience, that's ultimately your goal individually in your career and for your organization, for your nonprofit, right? And this is not something that you flip a light switch on, it happens overnight. This is an investment over the long term. As part of that investment, there are really 3 key pillars that we've identified here at Silver Maple Strategies. The first is morale, right? You and your team are bought into the mission. You feel a sense of optimism. You can observe progress. And again, in 2025, candidly, that could be really challenging, right? You're perhaps hearing about friends and colleagues who've lost their jobs, who've lost their funding, people who are trying to reorient themselves to this new environment. It can be very disorienting. And so the risk here is that if morale is not a priority, disillusionment sets in. And so that's what I want to help you avoid today. The second piece is flexibility, right? When the winds of change happen, are you able to move with that nimbly? Are you able to adjust because you've invested in really getting clear on your identity, really developing that strong brand? Have you developed those interpersonal relationships, not only with funders, but also with other partners and colleagues who are invested in this kind of work so that you can be very adaptable and experimental in your approach? If you don't, the risk is rigidity, right? And when something happens to sort of rock you, the risk is that you may break, right? Either psychologically or as a team, you become discombobulated. Maybe the way you talk is disorienting to people. And so they're not really sure what you're doing or where you're headed. So helping you build in a sense of both flexibility and stability that allows you to make progress and deliver real impact. That's the goal here. And then the third and final pillar of resilience is clarity, right? Clarity about how we talk about where we're going internally with our partners and with our funders, but also how we show up on the outside, right? Too many nonprofits are secrets in disguise, right? They're our best kept secret, right? And so you have lots of expertise, tremendous depth of knowledge and experience, both maybe academic experience, but also lived experience and various disciplines under the umbrella of your organization. And yet, too often, your authority, your thought leadership is absent, or maybe an occasional LinkedIn post versus a steady stream of insights and perspective that really helps people get to know you. Because ultimately, nonprofits are made up of people. The people are doing the work. The people are having impact on other people. So how do we bring those faces in people's lives and experiences to the forefront? That's clarity, right? When you don't have that, what you're left with is ambiguity. And that results in sort of a strategic mismatch that maybe leads you to not being clear, not being prepared when new funding becomes available that you want to apply for, maybe not being clear enough with funders or partners. So it's immediately apparent to them, like, we have to work with them. We know that they're going to deliver value for every dollar we invest with them. And so that's what I think it takes to get to the point of thriving financially and operationally. And again, keep that in the back of your mind today as we go forward. So the 5 keys I want to address in greater depth are the following. The first is anchor in a bold future, right? If you really want to thrive from a branding standpoint and really show others why you're in this for the long game, it really helps to have an anchor in something big you're working toward. And maybe you haven't defined exactly what that looks like yet. Maybe you just know the area in which you want to work, and that's okay. But what I'm going to challenge you to do today is really think about, what do you want to be in 2 years, in 5 years, maybe even in 10 years, right? I'm a strong believer in sort of multi-generational thinking, right? Because all of us know in purpose-driven work, unfortunately, life is really short, right? We only have a short amount of time to make a difference. And that can be debilitating if you think about it one way. But I think the better way to consider that or frame it is to say, look, we have an opportunity to do a lot of good now, right? A lot of my clients have worked on issues like climate change. And so this is something that's going to have multi-generational repercussions. But what can we do right now? What can I do as an individual? What can our team do? And that starts by figuring out what direction are we rowing in, right? And being able to communicate that vision to others. So number 1, anchor in a bold future. Number 2, evolve your brand intentionally, right? I'm not talking about sort of whole scale, let's tear everything down to the studs and rebuild it. You may want to do that at some point, but I think in this environment, between financial uncertainty and just, again, the environment right now, I think it maybe calls for more fine-tuned surgical precision in how you make adjustments. And again, acknowledging that a lot of what you're doing is probably working really well for you right now, but there may be areas to improve and grow in, and focusing on those. Number 3, taking an outside-in perspective. Again, this is the idea of getting independent counsel, having people you trust and know and like give you honest perspective that will help you really fine-tune your message, because oftentimes they know you better than you know yourself. You know all the ins and outs, the financials, the programs that you run, the expertise of the people you have in-house. But in terms of how to talk about that in a way that is concise and clear and empowering to people, it may be helpful to get some outside perspective. Number 4, highlight outcome-centric messaging, right? So again, focusing less on deliverables and activities and more on the transformation that you're delivering is going to be so powerful for you. And then finally, translating your values into audience clarity. And what I mean by that is speaking to the specific audiences that you and your organization really need to reach to be as effective as possible. So funders, stakeholders, partners, board members, the clients that you serve, depending on the kind of nonprofit you operate, really helping them see very clearly, why does this matter to me, and who are we prioritizing, who are we helping? Okay, I'm going to pause there and take a drink, and then I'm going to give you just a few more insights on each of those 5 keys. If you have a comment or a question, I want to encourage you to drop that in the chat now. I'll run you through those 5 steps briefly, and of course, give you the slides as a follow-up. And then we're going to jump into picking a name out of the hat and moving into our branding session on the fly in today's call. So I'll take a minute, drop a question or comment you may have into the chat, and then we will move into the back half of our session today, including that branding session. All right. Yeah, great question. So Pam asked in the chat, does a board of directors count as external ears? So I suppose it depends on who you ask, Pam. From my perspective, sort of yes and no, right? In my mind, external ears would be anyone who's not living in the day-to-day of your operation, right? So if they're not sitting in on staff calls, if they're not actively engaging with your clients, they are not going to have the unique boots on the ground perspective that you do living within the organization. And so a board is going to have a higher level of familiarity with your nonprofit than someone off the street who's coming in for the first time. And I don't necessarily think you need to, like your website, for example. I think it would be helpful if you're trying to recruit new board members or maybe current board members who want to talk to others about what they do and promote your good work. I think it does help to keep them in mind. And so thinking about the kinds of strategic questions they ask, presumably your board is here to help you make smart financial decisions and also think about the impact you're delivering, really understand where you're headed and maybe give you critical feedback to make sure you're going in that direction based on their personal expertise. So while the board has sort of an insider's perspective, I think they do have enough external clout. They're coming in as someone who is not an intimate part of your day-to-day operations. And so I would certainly think about them when it comes to your branding, how you package yourself, both in board meetings, but also in terms of your public-facing messaging. Because again, people who are on your board, in theory, can be some of your best advocates and champions, right? They may have connections to funding. They may have connections, if you're a membership-driven organization, to people who may be great members or future board members. And so keeping them in mind and helping them buy in and really clarifying for them, because again, I've been a part of not working in the corporate environment with boards that we assembled for running specific programs in partnership with nonprofits. And so oftentimes those board members, quote unquote, knew enough to be dangerous about the work we were doing, but they often had sort of commonly asked questions that, maybe we thought we'd answered 2 months ago that recurred. And so, thinking about frequently asked questions sections or just insights, heuristics that really help cut the time to learning and really upskilling on understanding what your nonprofit does so that they can be vehicles of championing what you do, communicating effectively on your behalf, asking the right questions, which saves you time and hassle internally. So yeah, a really good question. Thank you for that. I had to think about that one for a minute, but I appreciate your asking it. I do think there's value in thinking about boards as one of those sort of audiences you're serving with your branding. Okay, so really quickly, before we dive into our live session, anchor in a bold future. So the challenge here is that there's a tendency to sort of pull back in times of challenge. I think there's a real benefit in investing in defining what that future looks like. And so in this sort of challenging environment, I think there are 3 keys to this. Number 1, define the no-go zones. So if there are specific keywords or things like that that you can't say or that may pose a challenge, you're going to have to decide, are we willing to stand our ground on this? Is this issue important enough? And in many cases, you'll say, yes, like I'm not backing down on this. In other cases, you may say, look, for the purposes of this current season, we're going to reframe. We're not backing off of this commitment that we've made, but we may need to talk about it a little bit differently. And so you need to define that as an organization. Talk with your team, talk with your clients, your board, what you're hearing in whatever circles you get funding from, whether that's Washington or elsewhere. And then you have to make the call, right? That's part of leadership, is making some of those challenging calls. Work with ChatGPT or an AI tool to really get those hard questions and anticipate objections, and then figure out where you're going to draw the line in the sand and then write that down so you have an internal guide at the least. Secondly, really reframe the game, right? Don't only showcase the things that your organization does, but really focus on what are you learning? What are you mastering? What are the transformations you deliver better than anyone else, right? How have you evolved as an organization? I think funders really value understanding being active learning partners, right? Because you're giving them insights that are going to inform their future funding decisions. So think about opportunities there to really talk about what you're learning, how you're growing, and how that's informing the impact you deliver. And then finally, emphasize action over sort of being frozen in the headlights, right? It's very tempting to sort of pull back, as I said earlier, but use this as a way to say, look, we're going to make an investment. We are moving toward a better future. That's why we exist as an organization. Let's define that future and define the first step toward that next step. Number two, evolving your brand intentionally. So again, this is my encouragement to you to do some kind of internal review, but that doesn't mean you have to, again, rip everything up and start from scratch. First of all, I would focus on your most high profile assets. And in today's world, I would really focus a lot of attention on your website and on how you're showing up, especially on LinkedIn, which is where I suspect a lot of funders in this work of the nonprofit world are going to be spending their time. How do you show up in those places in particular, right? And focus on that and also add a cadence, right? We're not just going to do this sort of randomly and piecemeal. Maybe it's once a quarter or every 6 months. We're going to review and update our language, our brand image based on what we're learning so that we are accurately reflecting to the world what we know today and how we're implementing that work and making impact. Refresh and don't revamp. I think that's, again, the focus on really being surgical, being selective. If what you're doing is working, great, but maybe there are a few subtle changes you could make. And then finally, again, ensure your brand represents you, right? Uniquely you, not just like this vanilla sort of we do conservation work or we work in agriculture. Like, what exactly are you doing? How are you showing up and making change? And really think about that primary audience, right? Is your website, are your public-facing resources really designed to inform funders? Are you a more of a membership-driven organization, in which case maybe your members are the top priority for that website and your LinkedIn page? Again, I think there are ways to talk to multiple audiences, but think about the number one audience first and foremost and make that your priority as far as how you show up online. Number three, taking an outside perspective. So own the box, right? You don't have to be an expert at telling your story, but find those who can help you outside of your organization, whether that's someone you trust, whether it's someone you hire, whether it's a friend or a past colleague. Getting some outside perspective on, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. Do you see that coming through in our messaging and our branding will be really helpful to you. Prioritizing thought leadership. Again, in order for others to see you for who you are, we have to hear from you and not just you as the sort of monolithic organization, but you as the individuals that make up your team, that make up your organization, maybe even that make up your board or your clients. Like, let us hear from them. That's how you're going to, again, allow others to more clearly see and feel and understand who you are. And then I would definitely encourage you to leverage artificial intelligence tools to the degree that you feel ethically you can as a thought partner, right? Something that can help you get outside perspective, challenge your thinking, not just as a time saver, but it really as a strategy partner to interview you, to ask you specific questions. Again, I mentioned that book, The AI-Driven Leader, earlier, not being paid by them at all, but I do highly recommend the source material. I think it's really strong and also will challenge just how you think day to day as a leader. Number four, outcome-centric messaging. So again, finding ways to really create a library of assets, impact reports, data, surveys you've taken, case studies about successful programs you've delivered. Have those sitting on a shelf or a digital shelf somewhere so that you can quickly be able to use that to illustrate outcome on your website, in your messaging with funders, etc. Ask pointed questions, right? Are we clear about what we do where it matters? Use that as a way to, maybe dedicate a time in a standing meeting with your team, maybe some thought time on your own as an executive. Take 30 minutes and journal on this question, right? Are we being clear? If I were a funder coming in for the first time, what might confuse me? What might I have questions about? What are things we hear time and again that people just don't understand about what we do? How could we make that clearer? How could we dial that toward our outcomes that we deliver? And then again, just making sure that your outcomes and your activities are separated, right? The activities matter a lot, but what those activities ladder up to is outcomes, is impact. So really focus on that, whether you're putting together a grant or you are simply talking about it on your website. And then finally, translating your values to those specific audiences that matter most, right? I mentioned earlier, focus first and foremost on that number one audience. You'll have to decide who that is for yourself, but then wear your funder cap. Because ultimately, you can't do the work and deliver the impact without money. And so what would an executive who is holding a checkbook say about you based on your website? Like, what would they walk away from? Help them get clearer faster on what that is. Secondly, engage trusted executives, right? Again, this is the idea of going outside of your organization and finding people at a C-suite level or a program manager level, people who have funding decision-making authority, and say, look, if you were a funder, what would you be asking, right? Maybe even talk to people in the for-profit world. Because again, they're all about packaging things, making sales. What are the really critical questions you might get and how can you be prepared to respond to those? And then finally, don't shortchange yourself on your progress, right? So metrics and outcomes, those are really important to be able to have on hand. But also think about what my business coach, Ed Gandia, calls key indicators of progress, right? A lot of times in this work, change doesn't happen overnight, right? Change might happen over months or even years. And so you need to be able to look back on your own history as an organization and say, hey, this is how we used to talk about us. Look how much clearer we are now. Look how much more disciplined we are in our financial management, or how we talk about impact, how we engage our funders. So again, make sure that as you're focusing on all of these external facilities or focus areas, you're also giving yourself credit internally and celebrating how far you've come. So definitely never shortchange yourself. Here's a summary dashboard. Again, I won't dwell on this because you'll get this as part of the follow-up materials. What I really want to do now is move into our branding session. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pull up the little name selector here. So I know there are a couple of folks on our call today who aren't nonprofits, which we are delighted you're here. But I really wanted to make sure that this is focused on our nonprofit friends. And so I'm going to click this button and see who is going to be our lucky candidates. I did try to run this by everyone today so that you wouldn't be surprised. All right, it looks like Ellen is here. Ellen is our winner today. So Ellen, I hope maybe you're with us. And if you are, if you want to join us, that would be fantastic. I'm going to start with a few questions and then we'll take a look at your website.
Okay, how's that?
Ellen, it's great. Nice to have you with us. Do you have another colleague here, Ellen, from your organization?
Yes, Haley is with us as well.
Great. Well, Ellen, Haley, great to have you here. So Ellen, let me ask you, tell us a little bit about your nonprofit and what it is that you do in the world.
So we are the National Grazing Lands Coalition, and we started in 1991 in response to priority shifting from technical assistance for grazing land producers. We started in 91, but we had one part-time staff member for the first 25 years. And in the last 5 years, we've gone from one part-time person to, we were up to 18, but unfortunately, due to federal cuts, we're now down to 12, but 12 full-time staff members. And we do a mixture of education, both digitally and in person. We also have state coalitions in about half of the United States, as well as one tribal coalition. And then we also have 13 member organizations that appoint 2 board members who are farmers and ranchers to represent their organization on our board. So we have a lot of different people we answer to, as well as different target audiences, but ultimately we are producer-led and producer-focused, and we represent all of the grazing lands, not a specific commodity, not a specific type of ruminant animal. It's, I think, a really exciting thing to be able to represent so many different types of producers. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ellen. Haley, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
She covered basically all of it. Great job, Ellen. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that great background. So it sounds like, am I understanding that sort of the producer, again, you do serve a variety of producers, but that's really, when it comes to your branding and how you show up in the world, that producer voice and focus really needs to be top of mind. Ellen, is that a fair assessment?
Correct.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about what you define as a successful outcome for those producers that you serve based on those activities and various geographies that you serve?
Yeah, great question. So, I would say first and foremost, our goal is to keep working lands in production. And we don't have like a specific type of agriculture or certain language like regenerative or amp grazing or any of those maybe specific types of things you hear today. Our primary goal is to keep working lands in production. If you have a grazing animal, we want you to be a part of our pipeline. I would say like the second thing is we do have a yearly gathering. Every 3 years, we have a really large conference. And then in the in-between years, we do a bus tour, which you see on our pop-up right here. And the goal of that is it rotates around the country, whatever our location is. But the main takeaway is really the networking and kind of that. What I think is so special about our group is we really are people first. And the main feedback that we're constantly getting is we really love that networking and shared experience abilities. So, at this Washington state-based bus tour, we're expecting people from all over the country. And our feedback in previous years is, the landscape isn't exactly what I'm facing back home, but I love to get together once a year and keep up with the different folks from around the country because that really gives me a support system when I go back home to rural America where I may not have a lot of peers doing the same thing that I'm doing.
Awesome. I love that. And that's exciting to hear about the level of engagement you have, the positive feedback you're getting about those events and getting to see those things firsthand. That's wonderful. Ellen, I know you mentioned that sort of producers are the primary audience. If you could name two other audiences that are really key, like without these stakeholder groups, we don't exist as an organization, who would those groups be?
Yeah, I mean, we are a nonprofit, so we don't have any kind of lobbying arm, but definitely policymakers, and especially being mostly federally funded, historically 100% federally funded, except for the last couple of years. So we want policymakers to continue to put opportunities out for grazing lands and technical assistance. And then we also work a lot with technical service providers, such as NRCS or Extension. And that's something I didn't mention earlier, but in the last few years, we've done a ton of training for those people who are 5 years or less on the job. We have a small staff. We would love to have, a field office in every county in America, but we see that being able to train folks in a local capacity helps bring technical assistance directly to farmers and ranchers.
Yeah, I love that. That's super helpful, Ellen, both understanding sort of the education outreach to policymakers for making resources available to producers to stay on the land and to be as effective as possible managing those landscapes. And then also understanding the work you do in training and supporting the technical assistance providers who work in partnership with producers. When you say you want to help producers stay on the land and be productive, are there specific metrics you look at in terms of a producer's financial well-being? How do you define like what success looks like for those producers?
I think that's probably a gap that we have. And one just being that we had not a huge capacity overall in the last few years. And now, we work directly with our state coalitions, and they may have some metrics based on whatever their events are, different things. I mean, overall, we talk about profitability and succession and several of those kind of big topics you hear in agriculture. But no, we're not currently gauging beyond grants and programs that we have specific deliverables. Those obviously have very specific metrics, but across the country, we haven't really defined that.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fine, Alan. Thanks for sharing that. I think this is something that a lot of nonprofits are sort of thinking about deeply, right? And I think it just takes time to sort of figure out what does that look like you said, when you're running multiple grant programs, figuring out the through line can take some time and thought. I definitely think it's an opportunity to explore, but it sounds like you're already there. Like, okay, how do we start to map out what broader outcomes look like across the country, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Yeah. And we talk about acres impacted or how many producers come through our pipeline, whether that's at an in-person event or a conference or at one of our grant deliverables or at our personal conference. We've had a lot of discussion and would love to hear your take on especially in the relating these outcomes to potential funders, which is a conversation that we've been having, obviously, with the federal cuts and changes. But what are the metrics that get people excited? I don't know if you have a thought.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think anytime that you are able to tie back the work that you're doing to the farm producer's economics, right? I think sometimes we, as nonprofits, maybe bristle at this idea that money is driving everything, right? Because what you're doing has a purpose beyond finances. But to me, I think it's really important for any of those audiences, producers know better than anyone, that depending on what you're growing and raising, depending on the agricultural economy, things can be really great for a while, but also really challenging. And so at the end of the day, what drives their ability to be successful is financial freedom or sustainability to be able to continue investing in the stewardship, sustainability practices on grazing lands, for example, or investing in conservation practices on row crop acres, to give a very specific example. And then, of course, for policymakers or for technical service providers, right, they need to make sure that they are adding capacity to those producers to help keep them in business, right? If producers go out of business, technical service providers aren't going to have people to help, and policymakers are going to have severely impacted constituencies that matter to them. And so I think anytime you can develop key indicators of progress that sort of speak to how the investments you're making both sort of have check multiple boxes. So starting with financial health and well-being at the farm gate, to the environmental stewardship benefits you're providing, to the capacity you're adding both financially and through knowledge and training to help them be more effective managers of those things on their own or in partnership with a technical provider. those are some of the thoughts that initially come to mind. Definitely think it's worth a deeper conversation, but I don't know, does any of that resonate for you?
Yeah, that's really great feedback.
Awesome. Haley, before we dive into the website for the last few minutes here, anything you'd like to add or maybe questions or comments you wanted to make about sort of where you're at in your branding and engaging with funders journey?
Yeah, I mean, lately the conversation has been going so far as to say, like, really, there are grazers that are producing food, and we really want to bring in the general population, which is another tangent to really like tackle. It's another larger target audience. And we've been just kind of exploring, like, how do we get the message to the general population, people that are living in cities, larger voting pools that influence what is done and the development that is done on grazing lands. So just kind of sharing the importance of grazing lands to people who live in the city and that are kind of detached from where their food comes from or the importance of agriculture in the United States. So that's something else that we've kind of been exploring and chewing on.
Thank you for sharing that, Haley. I think that's really interesting. And I think it's really the strategy you're applying, like thinking about those secondary and tertiary impacts, like who are the other audiences whose buy-in we really need for this mission to ultimately be successful is really important. I'm guessing that you probably don't have like a direct channel at this point to the average American, either in a suburban or urban area, for engaging in that kind of way. But nonetheless, I think keeping that in the back of your mind so that when you're working with one of these three primary groups you've outlined, right, producers, government agencies or policymakers, and technical service providers, you're thinking in the back of your mind, okay, what touch points do they have to local communities or to people? How can we equip them with messages to bring back to their constituents or networks that sort of reinforce the value of these grazing lands? I think that's something powerful to keep in mind. So thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you're having those conversations. Maybe let's take a quick look for the next couple minutes at your website. I'm curious, Ellen, from your perspective, I love the pop-up here. I love the visuals that you've incorporated on your website, the color palette. Again, I will be the first to admit I'm not a branding expert as it comes to like visuals and graphic design. I really think about the message and how it ties back to your financial and operational goals. But maybe tell me what you're hoping when producers as your primary audience visit your website. Like, what is the one action you hope they'll take, or how do you hope they will engage with your materials here?
So right now, clearly our call to action is the bus tour. We're approaching in 2 weeks. Our prices will go up. The event is in June. So that's our main goal right now, is to just round out registration for that event. But one thing we've really been focusing on in the last year, over a year ago, we did a full website redesign, which Haley did so much of this, and she's absolutely phenomenal. But kind of second after we did the website redesign, we really wanted to beef up our education tab. So we're now posting regular blogs, as well as we have this grazing resources page where one of our staff members has created downloadable grazing charts. We've had our ebooks for quite some time, but we've just been more regularly posting education that we think is really meaningful. So I would say using these educational resources, signing up for our events, and then also our just regular events tab. We also post the coalition events. So a lot of times people will try to figure out like what events are applicable in their area versus just like one nationwide event. So we try to keep that up to date. And then as a communications person, I'm always wanting them to subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media. But currently, we don't really have that as a call to action, but we do have on our homepage a subscribe to our newsletter portion.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. And yeah, kudos, Haley. I think you've got a really nice website with depth to it, right? I think one of the things that I really advise my clients to do is really think about thought leadership. And so I love that you've really centered this in the producer, which is your primary audience. You've got the blogs, the ebooks, the grazing resources. That's really powerful. I was happy, Ellen, which I'm, again, not surprised as a communications pro, to hear you talking about getting people signed up for your newsletter. But I think that's really key, right? Build your audience. And, maybe that's a future conversation. How do you build sort of and speak to multiple audiences, but get to them regularly? A couple of things to think about, I think, on your website, which again is beautiful. And I know you spent a lot of time and effort building it. I think a couple of things, the first thing I would point out is when it comes to some of this big call out text, I absolutely love that because it draws my eye right away. So you talk about the fact that National Grazing Lands Coalition is a dynamic force driving positive change in the agricultural landscape. Something to think about. And I know you're going to go into this more in your mission here, but in this larger text, I think you have a really great opportunity to define which piece of the agricultural landscape are you focused on, right? And of course, that's grazing lands. And maybe even how you define grazing lands, and then talking about what positive change looks like, right? So what I heard you say is we've got some specific outcomes and metrics within grants. We're still working on defining exactly what those maybe national scale outcomes look like. But I think you've already defined quite a bit of that, right? For success for you is helping keeping grazers on the land, right? Helping raising awareness of maybe threats that exist to, and again, I'm speculating here, so push back on any of this. Threats in the form of possibly residential development, urban encroachment, possibly maybe less than optimal conservation or stewardship practices that are putting that landscape at risk of not being as vital for grazing purposes, for soil health purposes, for wildlife habitat. Finding a way to maybe capture some of those specific outcomes you're delivering for that specific landscape. And again, I'm saying this as someone who's been in ag for quite some time. And so I kind of nerd out on these things. Like obviously grazing lands are very different than row crop lands, but just maybe using some of these really high profile opportunities to just underscore those points for folks might be something to think about. A second point to consider might be, and again, I know producers are your primary audience. I think maybe explicitly calling out funders and saying for funding partners, like a button, really calling them out so that they say, oh, this is for me. Again, just as we sort of go back to the keys I was talking about earlier, I think maybe some of those more subtle tweaks versus like an overhaul, because again, you've got a tremendous amount of core material here. And now it's just a matter of sort of maybe calling out and reshaping to really refine, this is who we are. This is what separates us from others. And this is how we are showing up for the producers that we serve. Let me stop there. I know we're about out of time. Does any of that resonate?
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with all of the things that you're saying.
Awesome. And again, feel free. You are always welcome to push back. I would love to have more time to go deeper. I know we're about out of time today, but I just want to commend you and Haley both and your team. Again, the call outs here, the voices of your team like Ashley, who please give Ashley my best. We've worked together in the past. I love getting to work with her.
She's said great things.
Oh, I'm grateful. Thank you. The farmer voices and faces, again, you have a lot going here. And I think there's a lot that all of us, me and attendees here, can learn from you all. So would love to talk about this further, but I hope this has been helpful. And I think just, again, thinking about how you show up, thinking about some of those small tweaks and really leading with outcomes, really being more specific in the language. And again, this applies to everyone in this room today, is going to allow you to just quickly grab attention and really speak to those core audiences, right? You're doing a masterful job speaking to producers. And now ask yourself, are there ways that we can maybe speak more clearly to the funder audience or the technical service provider audience? And again, that doesn't have to be the lead headline on your website, but if there's a place where they feel at home and they can sort of engage and maybe open the door of content to everything you've created, could be an opportunity to explore.
Yeah, this is all super helpful, especially in only like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I'm glad it was helpful. And we'll definitely follow up with you and everyone on the call today to see if, some further conversation would be helpful in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Ellen, and thanks, Haley. I'm going to jump back real quick and we're going to close us out today. So think about the next step you're going to take today. I've shared sort of 5 keys that I think can be helpful in reimagining your branding, right? Anchoring in a bold future, casting the vision for where you are headed as an organization, evolving your branding intentionally, not full scale, but really targeted way. Number 3, taking an outside perspective. Number 4, highlighting outcome-centric messaging. And number 5, translating values into audience clarity. So of those areas, which one would make the most sense for you? And what's the first action that you can take that would be most helpful to you and to your team? All right. Well, I know we're at time. I'm sure many of you have to hop to the next call. I want to say thank you all so much for taking the time. Would love to visit with you further. If you'd like to set up a call or want to discuss these ideas about branding or your nonprofit situation further, send me a note or go to my contact page on my website, silvermaplestrategies.com, and set up a meeting. You all have been a wonderful audience. I look forward to following up with you with those free resources very soon. Thanks again to Ellen and Haley for being willing participants in today's branding session. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to participate in the branding session, I'm going to follow up with you I have a special opportunity to maybe do that with each of you as well at no cost. I think there's a lot of learnings that I can have and hopefully something of value that I can give to you as well. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.